At dawn, the fog begins to lift, but all you can see is water. There is no dry land, only the rooftops of small houses. A few tall trees rise above the flood. There is nowhere to step. Everywhere is water, mud, and a strong current. But this is not a modern disaster. This was the reality at the dawn of civilization. The world's first great civilizations grew beside rivers: Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, the Indus, the Yangtze, and the Yellow River. Every year, the floods returned, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. In some places, the land stayed underwater for nearly 6 months. Farming stopped. Travel became impossible. Life stood still. Yet people survived. They did not give up. But how? What did they eat? Where did they live? And how did they endure a world covered by water? To understand life during a 6-month flood, we must first understand why people lived in flood-prone areas at all. Rivers were dangerous, but they were also life-giving. They provided fresh water, fish, transportation routes, and most importantly, fertile soil. Annual floods carried silt from upstream and spread it across floodplains. When the water receded, the land became extraordinarily productive. Crops grew better near rivers than anywhere else. Early agricultural societies faced a trade-off: predictable fertility in exchange for predictable flooding. Most chose the river. Still, months of floodwater meant dramatic changes to daily life. The first challenge was shelter. Early communities quickly learned that building on low ground guaranteed destruction. Archaeological evidence shows that many settlements were constructed on natural rises, riverbanks, or artificial mounds. Over generations, communities rebuilt repeatedly after floods. Each new layer of mud and debris became the foundation for higher ground. In Mesopotamia, such layered settlements formed what archaeologists now call tells, artificial hills built by centuries of reconstruction. Height meant survival. The higher the dwelling, the safer the family. In some regions, especially in tropical or delta environments, houses were built on stilts. Wooden posts lifted living spaces above the flood level. Water could flow beneath without entering the home. This architectural adaptation is still visible in parts of Southeast Asia today. The roots of such design likely stretch back thousands of years. The goal was simple: do not fight the water directly, rise above it. Food security was the second major concern. If fields remained submerged for months, planting was impossible. Harvest cycles had to account for flood seasons. Communities stored grain in advance. Large storage structures, sometimes communal, have been found in early river civilizations. Wheat, barley, millet, and other grains were dried and sealed in pottery jars or raised granaries. These stores were essential. Without them, prolonged flooding would mean famine. Food preservation extended beyond grain. Meat from livestock or hunting was dried or smoked. Fish were sun-dried or salted in regions where salt was accessible. Storage technology was not a luxury. It was a survival strategy. The ability to preserve food for months was one of the foundational skills that allowed permanent settlements to exist in flood zones. Yet floods did not eliminate food sources entirely. In fact, they sometimes increased them. Floodwaters brought fish into new areas. Shallow pools trapped aquatic life as waters shifted. Fishing became central during flood months. Nets, traps, harpoons, and simple hooks provided protein when agriculture paused. In some communities, people temporarily shifted roles. Farmers became fishers. Waterways also became transportation corridors. Canoes, rafts, or reed boats replaced foot travel. What had been farmland became navigable terrain. However, floodwaters also carried risks. Extended standing water increases disease. Mosquito populations grow rapidly, raising the threat of malaria and other illnesses. Contaminated water can spread gastrointestinal infections. Without modern sanitation, such conditions could be deadly. Children and elders were especially vulnerable. Archaeological data suggests that mortality rates fluctuated in early settlements, likely influenced by environmental stressors such as flooding. Communities adapted to these health challenges as best they could. Elevated living spaces reduced constant contact with water. Smoke from indoor fires repelled insects. Some cultures may have boiled water before drinking, though evidence varies. Nonetheless, prolonged flooding almost certainly increased illness and hardship. Survival required resilience. Livestock management posed another challenge. Domesticated animals represented wealth and future food supply. Cattle, goats, and sheep could drown or starve during extended floods. Herds had to be moved to higher ground. Temporary enclosures were constructed. In some cases, animals shared elevated platforms with humans. Preserving livestock meant preserving long-term survival. Daily routines changed during flood months. Agricultural labor slowed. Repair work increased. Tools were sharpened. Nets were mended. Pottery was crafted. Clothing was woven. Storytelling and ritual took on greater importance as people spent more time together in confined areas. Flood seasons may have strengthened social bonds, as cooperation was essential. Food sharing reduced individual risk. Collective planning ensured group survival. Yet psychological strain was unavoidable. Extended uncertainty creates stress. Watching water surround your home for months tests morale. Fear of rising levels, disease outbreaks, or food shortages could weigh heavily on a community. Storms during flood season added further danger. Structures weakened by water could collapse. Anxiety was part of life. Despite these hardships, floods were not viewed purely as disasters. In regions like ancient Egypt, annual flooding was seen as a blessing. The Nile's inundation determined agricultural prosperity. When floods were moderate, harvests were abundant. When floods failed or became excessive, famine or destruction followed. This delicate balance shaped religious beliefs. Rivers were personified as gods. Flood cycles became sacred rhythms. Rituals sought to ensure favorable inundations. The cultural impact of flooding is profound. Flood myths appear in many early civilizations. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes a catastrophic deluge. The biblical story of Noah recounts a world-destroying flood. The Indian legend of Manu tells of survival through rising waters. These narratives likely reflect collective memories of devastating floods that exceeded normal cycles. When waters rose beyond expectation, entire settlements could be erased. Such events left deep impressions. Flood management gradually advanced. Irrigation canals, levees, and embankments were constructed. In Mesopotamia, complex canal systems redirected water for agriculture while reducing destructive overflow. In Egypt, basin irrigation harnessed floodwaters in controlled ways. These engineering efforts were not merely agricultural innovations. They were responses to environmental pressure. Flooding forced technological creativity. Economic systems evolved around flood cycles. Agricultural calendars aligned with river behavior. Labor organization reflected seasonal shifts. Flood months may have allowed time for infrastructure building, religious festivals, or craft production. Water's rhythm structured society itself. Writing systems in some early civilizations were partly used to record harvests and manage stored grain, critical in flood-dependent economies. It is important to recognize variation. Not every flood lasted 6 months, and not every region faced identical conditions. Some floods were brief and beneficial. Others were catastrophic and prolonged. But in major river valleys, extended inundation was common enough to shape settlement patterns fundamentally. The degree of suffering depended on preparation. A community with ample grain storage and elevated housing could endure months of water with relative stability. A poorly prepared settlement might face starvation. Social inequality likely influenced outcomes. Elites may have had better storage and protection, while poorer households bore greater risk. Environmental unpredictability also mattered. A predictable annual flood allowed planning. An unexpected extreme flood overwhelmed defenses. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamian cities shows abrupt destruction layers from major flood events. Recovery required labor, coordination, and time. Some communities relocated permanently after repeated disasters. Still, most river civilizations persisted. The benefits outweighed the costs. Fertile floodplains supported larger populations than arid uplands. Trade flourished along waterways. Cultural exchange expanded. Rivers became highways of communication and commerce. During long floods, adaptability defined survival. Agriculture paused. Fishing intensified. Elevated dwellings sheltered families. Stored grain sustained communities. Social cooperation reduced individual risk. Ritual reinforced hope. Engineering improved over generations. The hardship was real. Food insecurity threatened lives. Disease spread more easily. Infrastructure suffered damage. Emotional strain weighed heavily, yet floods also brought renewal. When waters receded, fields were replenished with nutrients. Planting resumed. Life continued. In this cycle of submersion and emergence, early civilization learned discipline. It learned to plan for scarcity. It learned to build higher. It learned to store surplus. It learned to measure time by the river's rise and fall. Flooding was both adversary and teacher. Without floods, there may have been no fertile plains capable of sustaining dense populations. Without fertile plains, urban life may have developed more slowly. The very conditions that caused suffering also enabled growth. Thus, 6 months of floodwater in the ancient world meant adaptation rather than abandonment. People endured discomfort, illness, and uncertainty. They also harvested fish, repaired tools, strengthened bonds, and awaited the fertile aftermath. Flood cycles shaped architecture, economy, religion, governance, and technology. Human civilization did not emerge in calm environments. It emerged in unstable ones. Rivers demanded respect. Floods demanded foresight. And through repeated exposure to hardship, early societies developed resilience. When the waters finally withdrew each year, mud-coated land reappeared. Seeds were planted into freshly enriched soil. New crops rose. Children ran again on dry earth. The memory of the flood lingered, but so did the knowledge that survival was possible. In the end, long floods were not merely episodes of suffering, they were crucibles. They tested communities, they refined strategies, they forged cooperation, and in doing so, they helped transform scattered human groups into organized civilizations capable of enduring both abundance and disaster.